The Guardians movies are about family. I don't think that's a controversial statement. It's a series about outcast losers finding each other and connecting, not despite their otherness, but because of it, to make their own family. But it's also a series about the rejection of family, especially dads. There's a lot of daddy issues in these movies.
Well, of course I have issues! That's my freaking father!
The first movie focuses on Quill and his mom, and though it is pretty sad at times, it's mostly bittersweet. It's a far less critical examination of a parental figure than that of the other films, because going into Volume 2 things get a lot more complicated. Guardians 2 introduces Ego, Peter Quill's biological father, who at first seems to be everything Peter ever wanted in a dad, and it seems like he cares about Pete, but as it turns out, he doesn't really. He cares about Pete as a means of furthering himself. His name is Ego, and to him, Peter is an extension of that ego, not a person in and of himself. This is displayed by how he takes away Peter's agency with the intent to turn him into a battery when he stops being useful, by not complying with the take over the universe thing. Ego is also Mantis's father, but he doesn't really see her as anything other than a pet. He did keep her though, unlike his other children, but only because she turned out to be useful to him, like Peter. Speaking of, Peter's non-compliance with Ego's plan is triggered by Ego revealing that he was the one who killed Peter's mom.
It broke my heart to put that tumor in her head.
This leads into a pretty important moment. This moment almost seems paradoxical on a surface level reading. On the one hand, it shows us that to Peter, killing a family member is an absolute no-go. He's completely unable to tolerate that Ego killed his mom. On the other hand, his response to this reveal is literally killing a family member. But I think this tells us something very important about how Peter views family. The status of family member is not unconditional to him, it's something you earn, and it's something that can be lost. This is further reinforced by him accepting Yondu as his dad later on.
I had a pretty cool dad.
Meredith really loved Quill, she was family to him, but Ego, while biologically related to Peter, no longer qualified as family once he'd broken that chain by killing Meredith. In this moment, he essentially severs his bond to Peter, as indicated by Peter falling out of the trance-like synchronization state. Yondu was by no means a perfect dad to Peter, he probably wasn't even a good one.
You said you were gonna eat me! That was being funny! Not to me!
But in the end, he really came around, and in an act of love, he gave his own life to protect Peter, not for any other reason than that he loved him. I think this is an interesting thing to keep in mind moving on to Thanos. Just Right has a cool video about Thanos' general framing as a dad to the whole universe, but most importantly for this essay, Thanos is Gamora and Nebula's adopted father, and he's not great.
As a child, my father would have Gamora and me battle one another in training. Every time my sister prevailed, my father would replace a piece of me with machinery, claiming he wanted me to be her equal.
Thanos is an awful, abusive father figure, but he also undeniably loves Gamora, as proven in Avengers Infinity War. I remember this stirring up some controversy back when the movie came out, with people calling it problematic because of the text telling us that abusive parents can still love their children. I don't quite agree with that criticism. From what I understand, the problem with this scene was the idea that the Thanos-Gamora moment would lead people to think that this family member is abusive to me, but it's okay because they really love me. And yeah, that's not an uncommon problem in abusive relationships. But while it might sound strange, it is possible for abusive people to love the people they abuse. It might not be a good kind of love, it might be possessive or obsessive and ultimately very unhealthy for all parties, but it's still a kind of love. But that doesn't make it okay. And the text of Infinity War doesn't tell us that what Thanos does to Gamora is okay either just because he loves her. This is a deeply disturbing moment, and it is painted as such. Plus, Thanos is killed by our heroes twice. We're not supposed to like Thanos. He's a delusional, egomaniacal, obsessive, abusive monster. But why can we forgive Yondu and not Thanos? Yondu did some pretty messed up stuff too, after all. I think it comes down to this moment. By sacrificing himself to save Peter, Yondu demonstrates that Peter's life is what matters most to him. He loves him so much that he's willing to give up everything else to make sure that his son is okay. He's also breaking the cycle of abuse he inherited from his own parents who sold him into slavery as a child. Thanos would never do this for any of his children. He might love Gamora in his own fucked up way, but only to a point. Ultimately, he values his plan for the universe more than her. He's even willing to kill her so that he can keep working on his plan. But with Thanos' death, Nebula and the new Gamora are able to move on, like Quill and Mantis after Ego's death. There's another Guardians member though, who has been on the run from his own father for years, and that's Rocket. The High Evolutionary might not technically be Rocket's dad, but he is his creator, and he definitely fits in with the whole dad theme. The High Evolutionary is definitely a bad dad. He doesn't show love or care to Rocket or any of Rocket's siblings. This is sadly not inapplicable to real-life families either, where the parent or parents neglect their children to the point where the children have to raise and take care of each other. There is one thing that the High Evolutionary does value though, and that's intelligence. If nothing else, he does help nurture Rocket's intellect, maybe a little too much, to the point where Rocket's intelligence actually surpasses the High Evolutionary himself, and this enrages him like nothing else. The High Evolutionary is unable to tolerate the fact that he has been surpassed by his own son, so he aims to destroy him. He's unable to do so though, because Rocket, with the help of his newfound family, is able to push past the restrictions put upon him by his father. And with the High Evolutionary defeated, Rocket too is able to move on. The last dad of the series isn't an antagonist at all, it's Drax. He was a dad who lost his family, and thus believed that he could never be a father again. Instead, he became Drax the Destroyer, hellbent on revenge. But revenge never helped him. He moves on from target to target, but it never makes him feel any more whole after the loss of his family.
Yes. Of course, Ronan was only a puppet. It's really Thanos I need to kill.
But what did help him heal was becoming a dad again. So much so that for the first time in his life, he's able to cry, to even dance. He's not a perfect dad either, but he is trying his best, and he practically radiates with love for his friends and family. I guess lastly there's also Groot's parentage. We don't know what the OG Groot's parental situation was like, but this version of him grew up with 3 pretty good dads and 2 pretty good moms. And he turned out pretty good himself.
I love you guys.
As I said at the beginning, the Guardians movies are ripe with daddy issues. I think all the terrible dads in these movies are recognizable and surprisingly realistic in their problems. Ego is the kind of parent that only sees their children as extensions of themselves, only worthy of love if they're useful. Yondu was abused by his own parents and ended up perpetuating that cycle until he was finally able to break it and truly show his love for Peter. Thanos is the kind of dad that thinks of his children as neat things to have around the house. He likes training them and feels a certain sense of pride when they do well, but will ultimately always choose his job over his kids. The High Evolutionary is the dad that can't stand to see himself be outgrown and surpassed by his own child, to the point where he'd rather tear them down than let them live their own life. And Drax is Drax. I think the point that these movies make is that family isn't something to be taken for granted. Found family isn't any less valuable than your original family, and you shouldn't put up with an abusive parent or relative just because they're family. Find the people who actually love and care for you. That's your real family. Thank you for watching this video on the terrible dads of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies. I hope you liked it and you thought some of the things I said were interesting. Okay, that's it, bye.